The briefing room at Forward Operating Base, Dwyer smelled of dust and stale coffee as Chief Petty Officer Jake Hendricks spread the map across the plywood table. His team of 7 SEALs gathered close while the single oscillating fan pushed hot Afghan air from one corner to another. The village of Karyakalan sat circled in red marker 12 kilometers north, a known waypoint for Taliban supply routes moving weapons toward Helmand province. "Stay back with the supplies," Hendricks told Hospital Corpsman Second Class Maya Reeves as he traced the patrol route with his finger. "We need medical ready at the compound for when we return." His tone carried the same casual authority he used for any logistical detail, like fuel loads or ammunition counts. Reeves stood near the doorway with her arms crossed, her desert camouflage uniform marked with a Navy Corpsman insignia. She nodded once and made no comment about the assignment. The other SEALs glanced her direction briefly before returning attention to the mission details. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Webb tapped the map where elevation gave advantage for overwatch positions. He mentioned clear sight lines from the ridges and noted the approach vectors that would keep them concealed during movement. The briefing concluded with standard checks on communications equipment and rules of engagement. Hendricks dismissed the team to prep gear, then walked to where Reeves waited. He pulled an M4 rifle from the rack and handed it to her with a magazine. "Just in case," he said. "You probably won't need it, but keep it close." She accepted the weapon and checked the chamber out of habit. The magazine seated firmly and the bolts cycled smooth, but when she glanced through the optics, she noticed the reticle sat slightly canted. Dust had collected in the adjustment turrets. The front sight post showed wear from inconsistent maintenance. She said nothing about any of it, simply slung the rifle and headed toward the medical station. The compound consisted of 3 buildings arranged around a courtyard with an 8-foot wall providing security from the surrounding desert. Reeves spent the next hour organizing medical supplies in the largest structure, laying out trauma kits and 4 equipment on a field table. Through the open door, she heard the team loading vehicles and conducting final radio checks. Their voices carried the particular blend of focus and casual confidence that came before routine patrols. "Babysitting the doc," someone said with a laugh that echoed across the courtyard. Webb's voice responded with something about "at least she keeps the bandages organized." The comment drew more laughter before the conversation shifted to other topics. Reeves continued arranging supplies with methodical precision, placing each item exactly where she could reach it quickly in darkness or under stress. Her hands moved through the familiar patterns of preparation, the same movements she had performed dozens of times before. She wondered if people back in small towns across America, maybe in places like the one she knew, understood what it felt like to be seen as just one thing when you carried the weight of being capable of so much more. The thought passed as quickly as it came. The vehicles started their engines, and the sound of heavy tires on packed earth signaled the team's departure. She walked to the compound wall and watched the tomb wraps disappear into the brown landscape, dust trailing behind them like smoke. The silence that followed felt thick in the afternoon heat. She returned to the medical station and powered up the communications equipment, adjusting the frequency to monitor the team's tactical channel. Their voices came through clear as they called out grid positions and confirmed sectors of responsibility. The patrol would take them through 3 kilometers of open terrain before reaching the village outskirts where buildings provided concealment. Reeves checked her watch and marked the time on a notepad, then reviewed the medical protocols for the most likely injury scenarios. Gunshot wounds to extremities topped the list in this region, followed by fragmentation injuries and heat casualties. She verified that the supplies matched each protocol step, then settled into the waiting that defined so much of combat medicine. The hours passed with the sun tracking across cloudless sky. Radio chatter remained routine as the team moved into position and began their reconnaissance. Webb reported from his Overwatch location, while Hendricks coordinated movement through the village streets. Everything proceeded according to the briefing timeline. Then the radio traffic changed. The casual tone disappeared and voices became clipped, urgent. Hendricks called contact, and gave a grid position. Webb reported multiple enemy fighters with elevated positions. The count came through at 15 to 20 Taliban with automatic weapons and a clear advantage in terrain. Reeves moved to the map and marked the contact location with precise coordinates. She calculated distances and approach routes while listening to the team's situation develop through the speakers. The SEALs had walked into a prepared ambush with fighters positioned on rooftops and in second-story windows. Return fire came from multiple directions, and the team found themselves pinned in a narrow street with limited cover. The request for air support went out, but the response came back negative. No aircraft available for 15 minutes minimum. Hendricks made the decision to displace east to a more defensible position 400 meters away, but the route required crossing open ground under observation from enemy positions on the ridgeline. Reeves stepped outside and climbed the exterior stairs to the compound roof. From that elevation, she could see the ridgeline where the Taliban fighters had positioned themselves. The distance looked substantial, but she knew from the map coordinates it measured approximately 850 meters. She raised the rifle Hendricks had given her and looked through the dusty optic toward those positions. Her breathing steadied automatically. Webb pressed himself against the mud brick wall as rounds snapped overhead, his left shoulder burning where the grazing shot had torn through his uniform. The blood spread warm across his skin, but he ignored it while trying to reposition his rifle for a clear angle. The Taliban fighters on the ridgeline had perfect placement. Every movement the SEALs made drew immediate fire. Chief Hendricks crouched behind a stone planter 30 meters away and keyed his radio to coordinate with the scattered team members. They needed to reach the secondary position, but the route exposed them completely. He called for Webb's assessment on enemy positions, and the response came back strained. Webb reported 3 confirmed shooters on the high ground, with at least 2 more moving to flank from the east. The afternoon sun cast harsh shadows through the village streets, while dust hung in the air from impacts against the buildings. Hendricks calculated their options and found each one worse than the last. Extract helicopters remained 15 minutes out, and the landing zone would be under direct observation from enemy positions. They could not stay pinned in this location, and they could not move without sustaining casualties. At the compound, Reeves knelt on the roof and studied the ridgeline through her optic. She identified the muzzle flashes from 3 separate positions, each one placed to control different sectors of the village approaches. The angles gave the Taliban complete dominance over any movement the SEALs attempted. Heat waves shimmered across the distance, making the image ripple and dance. She keyed her radio and spoke directly to Hendricks. "Chief, I have elevated position at the compound with line of sight to the ridgeline. Can I assist with observation?" Hendricks responded immediately between bursts of gunfire. "Copy that, Doc. Maintain security at your location and prep for casualties. We will be coming in hot when we displace." Reeves pressed the transmit button once to acknowledge, then set the radio aside. She had phrased her offer carefully, and he had interpreted it exactly as she expected. The assumption that she meant spotting or basic security never crossed into question. She did not correct his understanding. The rifle in her hands felt foreign and familiar at the same time. She had deliberately left this part of herself behind when she cross-trained to corpsman, trading the precision of marksmanship for the precision of medicine. Both required steady hands and clear thinking under pressure, but one saved lives while the other ended them. She had made her choice years ago in a different desert during a different war. Webb fired twice at a target Reeves could not see from her angle, then cursed over the radio about Taliban fighters moving to better positions. His shoulder made weapon control difficult, and every shot required compensation for the injury. Hendricks called for him to fall back to the team's position, but Webb reported he could not move without exposing himself completely. Through her optic, Reeves tracked the movement Webb had described. 2 fighters appeared on a rooftop 400 meters from the SEAL position, carrying an RPK machine gun between them. They began setting up a tripod that would give them stable fire directly into where Hendricks and his team sheltered. The setup would take them perhaps 30 seconds to complete. She adjusted her position on the roof, settling into a prone stance that distributed her weight evenly. The muscle memory returned without conscious thought, her body remembering the countless hours spent in this exact configuration. Her left hand found the proper placement on the handguard while her right hand settled on the grip with familiar pressure. The rifle stock pressed against her shoulder and her cheek welded to the comb. The optic showed her the ridgeline target area, but the reticle alignment remained off from poor maintenance. She calculated the correction needed based on the cant angle and distance. 850 meters meant significant bullet drop with standard M4 ammunition. The heat created rising air currents that would push the round right. Wind moved from west to east based on the dust patterns, adding another variable to account for. She selected the closest of the three ridgeline shooters, a man positioned behind a low wall who fired controlled bursts toward the SEAL position. His pattern showed training and discipline. She placed the reticle high and left of where he appeared, compensating for all the factors her mind had processed in seconds. Her breathing slowed to the rhythm she had learned years ago. The trigger press felt smooth and deliberate. The rifle cracked and bucked against her shoulder. She worked the charging handle to chamber the next round while watching through the optic for impact assessment. The ridgeline shooter dropped behind his wall and did not reappear. She could not confirm the hit visually, but his cessation of fire indicated effect on target. In the village, Hendricks heard the distant shot and saw the ridgeline shooter collapse. He assumed friendly forces had arrived, or perhaps another unit operated in the area. The timing seemed fortunate, but he had no bandwidth to question it. He focused on using the momentary reduction in fire to organize his team's movement. Reeves had already found her second target before the first one finished falling. Another ridgeline shooter adjusted his position, apparently reacting to his partner going down. She led his movement with her reticle placement and pressed the trigger as he settled into his new location. The round took him center mass, and he crumpled forward over the wall. Webb saw the second impact clearly from his position, and the angle told him exactly where the shots originated. He keyed his radio with confusion evident in his voice. "Chief, who has sniper support? Those rounds are coming from the compound." Hendricks processed the statement while returning fire at a Taliban fighter in a window. He confirmed with Operations Center that no other assets operated in their area, then looked back toward their base. The compound sat clearly visible across the open ground with its flat roof providing elevation. He saw the muzzle flash of another shot and realized what Webb already understood. The third ridgeline shooter attempted to relocate after seeing two of his team eliminated by unseen fire. Reeves tracked him across 30 meters of movement and took him as he dove for new cover. The round caught him mid-motion, and his momentum carried him into a tumbling fall down the rocky slope. The volume of enemy fire decreased noticeably as the surviving Taliban fighters recognized accurate long-range engagement from an unexpected direction. Their confident aggression shifted to cautious repositioning. The pressure on the SEAL team eased enough for Hendricks to order movement toward the secondary position. His team moved in coordinated bounds, while Reeves maintained overwatch from the compound roof. She identified two more fighters attempting to pursue and engaged both in rapid succession. The first dropped at 900 meters, and the second fell back under cover after the near miss convinced him to abandon his advance. The SEALs reached their secondary position and established security while the enemy fire diminished to sporadic shots from distant locations. Hendricks immediately directed his team toward the compound, using the relative lull to extract from the village entirely. The helicopters would arrive soon, but the situation no longer required emergency extraction. Reeves ceased fire once the team cleared the danger area and began their movement back. She safed the rifle and collected the 6 spent casings from the roof, counting them automatically. 6 rounds fired, 5 confirmed effects, 1 suppressive. The numbers registered with professional detachment. She descended from the roof and returned to the medical station, setting the rifle aside to prepare for treating Webb's shoulder wound. Her hands moved through the prep work with the same efficiency they had shown with the rifle minutes before. Both were simply tools for accomplishing necessary tasks. The sound of approaching vehicles grew louder across the desert. The MRAPs rolled through the compound gate, trailing clouds of dust that settled slowly in the still air. Hendricks emerged from the lead vehicle before it fully stopped and moved directly toward the main building. His expression carried the intensity of someone who had just survived an ambush and discovered something impossible in the same afternoon. Webb climbed out more carefully, his left arm hanging awkward while blood continued seeping through the makeshift bandage he had applied. The other team members dismounted and began immediate security procedures, but their attention kept drifting toward the roof where they had watched those precise shots originate. Hendricks took the exterior stairs two at a time and found Reeves at the top, standing beside the rifle she had propped against the low wall. 6 brass casings lay arranged in a neat row on the concrete surface. She turned as he approached, and her expression showed nothing beyond mild concern for the team's condition. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" he asked without preamble. "Those were 800-meter shots under combat stress. Corpsmen don't get that training." Reeves glanced at the casings and then back to Hendricks. "I graduated Marine Corps Scout Sniper School before I cross-trained to the Corpsman rate. It should be in my service record." The statement landed between them like a physical object, while Hendricks processed what she had said so casually. Scout Sniper School acceptance required extensive screening, and the graduation rate hovered around 30%. The Marines did not hand out that qualification to anyone who could not perform at elite levels consistently. Webb appeared at the top of the stairs, moving slower than Hendricks, but driven by the same need for answers. He walked to where the casings lay and examined their placement, then looked out at the ridgeline where the Taliban shooters had positioned themselves. His mind calculated angles and windage automatically, the professional assessment of one marksman evaluating another's work. "You made those shots with this rifle," Webb said while pointing at the M4. He picked up the weapon and looked through the optic, immediately noticing the misaligned reticle. "This optic is off by at least 2 mils. Reeves nodded. "I calculated holdover instead. There was not time to zero it properly." Webb stared at her for 3 seconds before speaking again. "You calculated holdover for 850 meters with an optic you had never used before in combat against moving targets." His tone carried disbelief mixed with something approaching awe. Hendricks remembered handing her that rifle with casual dismissal, telling her she probably would not need it. The weight of his assumption pressed down with uncomfortable clarity. He had assigned his most qualified long-range shooter to stay behind based entirely on her current rate designation and never bothered to read deeper into her background. Reeves shifted her attention to Webb's shoulder, where blood had soaked through his uniform. "That needs treatment now. The discussion can continue inside where I have proper supplies." She moved past both men and descended the stairs without waiting for response. Her transition from marksman back to corpsman appeared seamless and natural, as though the shooting had been a brief interruption in her actual duties. Hendricks and Webb followed, after exchanging glances that communicated shared confusion about who exactly they had been working with. The medical station smelled of antiseptic and canvas as Reeves directed Webb to sit on the field table. She cut away his uniform sleeve with scissors and examined the wound with practiced efficiency. The round had gouged a channel through the outer deltoid muscle without hitting bone or major vessels. Painful and bleeding, but not life-threatening. "Why did you switch to corpsman if you were already a qualified sniper?" Webb asked while she irrigated the wound. "That is not exactly a common career progression." Reeves focused on her work, cleaning away blood to assess the tissue damage. "I wanted to save lives more than take them. Medicine seemed like the better way to serve." She applied antiseptic, and Webb hissed at the burning sensation. Hendricks stood near the doorway and watched her hands move with the same precision she had displayed on the rifle. The connection between the two skill sets became obvious once he understood what he was seeing. Both required absolute control and the ability to perform under extreme pressure. "How many Taliban did you hit?" Hendricks asked. 5 confirmed, Reeves said while beginning to suture the wound. One more broke contact after near miss. She worked the needle through tissue with small efficient movements, each stitch placed exactly where it needed to be. Webb processed those numbers against what he knew about long-range shooting. 5 for 6 with a rifle you just picked up. Most qualified snipers would be proud of that performance with their dedicated weapon systems. The radio on Hendricks' vest squawked, and Lieutenant Commander Sarah Park's voice requested his status report. He stepped outside to take the call, while Reeves finished Webb's treatment. She wrapped the shoulder in clean gauze and secured it with medical tape, then helped him into a fresh uniform top. "You could have told us about your background when you joined the team," Webb said quietly. Reeves disposed of the bloody materials in a designated container. "I did not hide anything. My service record contains all my qualifications. I just did not volunteer information about something I left behind deliberately." Webb stood and tested his shoulder's range of motion, finding it limited but functional. "You left behind being one of the best shooters I have ever seen. That seems like something worth mentioning." She met his eyes directly. "I mentioned what mattered for my job. I am your corpsman. Yesterday, I was supposed to stay in the past." Hendricks returned as she spoke those last words. His expression had shifted from confusion to something more serious. "Command want a full debrief on what happened. They are sending Lieutenant Commander Park here tomorrow to interview you and review the engagement." Reeves acknowledged the information with a simple nod and continued organizing her medical supplies. The efficiency of her movements suggested she found comfort in the familiar routine, the concrete tasks that defined her chosen role. Hendricks watched her work and wondered what else he had missed about the people under his command. The other team members began filtering into the building with equipment that needed maintenance or questions about the next patrol schedule. Several glanced toward Reeves with new curiosity, but none spoke about what they had witnessed. The dynamic in a room had shifted in ways that would take time to fully understand. Miller, the team member who had made the babysitting comment before the patrol, approached Reeves and asked if she needed help organizing supplies. His tone carried none of the casual dismissal from earlier. She accepted his offer, and they worked together in silence, passing equipment back and forth with growing coordination. As evening settled across the compound, and the temperature finally began dropping from the day's brutal heat, Hendricks sat alone reviewing the after-action report he would need to submit. The words on the page failed to capture what had actually occurred. How did he explain that he had never bothered to read his corpsman's full service record? That he had benched his most qualified marksman because he saw her rate insignia before he saw her capabilities? Webb joined him with 2 bottles of water and sat without speaking for several minutes. Finally, he broke the silence with a statement that summarized the situation perfectly. "We assumed she was just a medic." Hendricks accepted the water and took a long drink. That assumption almost cost us the mission. The thought settled heavy in the growing darkness, while somewhere in the building Reeves continued the work she had chosen, saving lives with the same hands that had protected them all. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Park arrived at Forward Operating Base Dwyer on a Chinook helicopter that kicked up enough dust to coat everything within 50 meters. She carried a briefcase containing Reeves' service record and 3 similar files that had caught her attention during preliminary research. The pattern she discovered troubled her more than the individual incident. Hendricks met her at the landing zone and escorted her to the operations center where they could speak privately. The building's interior offered minimal relief from the heat, but at least provided space away from the constant activity of the compound. Park set her briefcase on the table and pulled out a file folder 2 inches thick. "I spent yesterday pulling Hospital Corpsman Reeves' complete military record," Park said while opening the folder. She graduated 3rd in her Scout Sniper School class of 24. Qualified expert on 7 different weapon systems. Completed advanced reconnaissance training before requesting cross-training to corpsmen. Her instructors at Quantico rated her as one of the best natural shooters they had seen in years. Hendricks absorbed the information with growing discomfort. All of that was in her file when she joined my team. Park nodded, along with her medical certifications, trauma care qualifications, and deployment history. "The question is why you did not incorporate any of her sniper background into your mission planning." The answer sat obvious between them, but Hendricks stated it anyway. "I saw a corpsman on her rate designation and never looked deeper. I assumed she was just medical support." Park pulled 3 more folders from her briefcase and spread them on the table. These are other cases I found in preliminary review. A SWCC boat operator who is also a qualified EOD technician but has never been utilized for demolitions work. A Navy diver assigned to a SEAL team who completed Ranger School but operates purely in his diving role. A logistics specialist with a degree in computer science who could provide cyber support but only handles supply requisitions. She tapped each folder in sequence. The pattern repeats across naval special warfare. We assign specialists based on their current rate and never integrate their additional qualifications. We are underutilizing our own people because we do not look past their job titles. Hendricks studied the folders and recognized the systemic problem she described. How many total cases have you identified? 23 so far, Park said, and I have only reviewed personnel assigned to SEAL teams. The number likely increases if we examine the broader special operations community. A knock on the door interrupted their conversation, and Webb entered at Hendricks' invitation. Park asked him to provide his technical assessment of Reeves' shooting performance as the team's designated marksman. Webb sat and gathered his thoughts before speaking. I've been a qualified sniper for 6 years, he began. I have made shots at that range under controlled conditions with dedicated equipment. What Corpsman Reeves did yesterday ranks in the top 1% of marksmanship I have witnessed. She used a basic rifle with a misaligned optic, calculated all corrections mentally, and achieved 5 hits out of 6 rounds fired at extended range against moving targets under combat stress. Park made notes while he spoke. In your professional opinion, how does her capability compare to other snipers you have worked with? Webb considered the question carefully. If she had been operating with proper equipment and position, those shots would have been easier for her than they were difficult. Her fundamentals are that solid. The fact that she made them with a rifle she had never fired before tells me her training went far beyond basic qualification. Park thanked him, and Webb departed to return to his duties. She closed her notebook and looked at Hendricks directly. I need to interview Reeves next. Can you have her report here? Hendricks used his radio to summon Reeves from the medical station. While they waited, Park organized her notes and reviewed the specific questions she needed answered. The sound of boots on concrete announced Reeves' arrival, and she entered the operations center with professional bearing despite still wearing her medical gear. Park introduced herself and explained the purpose of the interview. I'm trying to understand both what happened yesterday and why your full capabilities were not integrated into team operations. This is not an investigation into wrongdoing. I am looking at systemic issues in how we utilize cross-trained personnel. Reeves sat across from Park and waited for the questions. Her posture remained relaxed but attentive, the bearing of someone accustomed to military formality. Walk me through your decision to engage those targets, Park said. What made you move to the roof with a weapon instead of remaining in your medical role? Reeves organized her thoughts before responding. The team was pinned with casualties, likely if they attempted to displace. Webb was injured and could not provide effective overwatch. I had the elevation and line of sight to the enemy positions. The tactical situation required someone to provide covering fire, and I was the only person available to do it. Did you inform Chief Hendricks of your intentions? I offered assistance, but phrased it vaguely. When he assumed I meant observation only, I did not correct that assumption. Reeves' tone carried no apology or justification, simply stating facts. Park made notes and continued. Why did you not inform your team about your scout sniper background when you joined? Reeves paused before answering, the first time she had shown any hesitation. I completed sniper training 5 years ago during my first enlistment. When I cross-trained to corpsman, I did so because I wanted my purpose to be saving lives rather than taking them. I did not hide my background. It is all documented in my service record. I simply did not advertise something I had deliberately moved away from. But you were willing to return to it when the situation required it, Park observed. Reeves met her eyes steadily. I was willing to do what was necessary to protect my team. That is what both roles are ultimately about. Park shifted to a different line of questioning. When you made those shots, were you confident in your ability to hit those targets? Yes. The conditions were not optimal, but they were within the performance envelope I trained for. I knew the holdovers required, and I trusted my fundamentals. The confidence in that statement struck Park as significant. Not arrogance, but professional assessment of her own capabilities. She made another note before continuing. How do you feel about the possibility of being utilized in both your medical and marksmanship roles going forward? Reeves took longer to answer that question. I chose corpsman because that is the person I want to be. But I understand that I may not have the luxury of being only one thing. If the mission requires both capabilities, I will provide them. Park concluded the interview and dismissed Reeves back to her duties. After the corpsman left, she sat reviewing her notes while Hendricks waited. The implications of what she had learned extended far beyond this single incident. This is bigger than one Ms. specialist, Park said finally. We have built a culture that puts people in boxes based on their rate and never looks at the complete picture. Reeves could have been utilized as secondary sniper from day one, but no one asked the question. Hendricks acknowledged the assessment with a nod. What happens next? Park closed her notebook and stood. I briefed the group commander tomorrow on what I have found. This needs to become a command-level initiative to review how we integrate cross-trained personnel across all teams. We cannot afford to keep missing these capabilities. She gathered her materials and prepared to depart for her flight back to headquarters. As she reached the door, she turned back to Hendricks with one final observation. Your corpsman saved your patrol yesterday. But the real question is how many other missions have we compromised because we never discovered what our people could actually do. The statement hung in the air after she left, a challenge that demanded answers Hendricks was not sure anyone could provide. He returned to his team area where preparations continued for the next patrol cycle. Reeves worked in the medical station with Miller, teaching him proper tourniquet placement while they organized supplies together. The casual conversation and easy cooperation suggested the team was adapting to their new understanding of who she was. But Hendricks recognized that adaptation needed to happen at levels far above this compound, in planning cells and training commands where the assumptions got built into doctrine. The Naval Special Warfare Group Commander's office at Coronado overlooked the Pacific Ocean through windows that showed the endless blue horizon. Captain Richard Morrison sat behind his desk reviewing Park's preliminary report while she stood at ease waiting for his response. The document contained 17 pages of analysis and recommendations that challenged decades of personnel management practices. Morrison closed the report and removed his reading glasses. 23 confirmed cases of underutilized specialists in my command alone. How many more exist across the other groups? Park had anticipated the question. I estimate between 80 and 100 across all naval special warfare, if the pattern holds consistent. The problem appears systematic rather than isolated to any particular command. The captain stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. Explain to me how we let a scout sniper school graduate sit in a purely medical role for 8 months without anyone noticing. Park moved to stand beside him and chose her words carefully. We have built processes that prioritize current rate over complete capability. When Corpsman Reeves transferred to the team, her assignment focused on medical support requirements. Chief Hendricks received her personnel file, but the administrative summary highlighted her corpsman qualifications. Her sniper background appeared further down in the documentation where busy team leaders often do not read. Morrison turned from the window to face her directly. That is a process failure we need to correct immediately. What else did you find? Park pulled out her tablet and displayed a summary chart. The 23 cases break into 3 categories. First, specialists with combat qualifications not utilized in tactical planning, like Reeves. Second, technical experts with advanced degrees working in basic administrative roles. Third, personnel with language skills or cultural knowledge never incorporated into mission preparation. She swiped to show specific examples. We have a logistics specialist with a master's degree in computer science processing supply forms instead of supporting cyber operations. A SWCC operator who is a qualified EOD technician but has never touched demolitions equipment in his current assignment. A cultural affairs specialist who speaks fluent Pashto working as a base administrator rather than supporting intelligence collection. Morrison absorbed the information with visible frustration. Each one represents capability we paid to develop and then failed to utilize. The training costs alone must total millions of dollars. Park nodded, but the operational cost is higher. How many missions could have been more effective with proper integration of existing capabilities? How many risks could have been reduced? We cannot measure what we lost through inefficiency. The captain returned to his desk and pulled up personnel databases on his computer. Show me the implementation plan you mentioned in your report. Park connected her tablet to the conference room display and walked through her proposed solution. The plan had 4 phases, beginning with immediate review of all assigned personnel across NSW commands, followed by updated assignment protocols, revised team leader training, and quarterly audits to ensure sustained compliance. Phase 1 requires commanders to pull complete service records for all assigned personnel within 30 days, she explained. Not just current rate qualifications, but full training history, education, specialized skills, language abilities, and previous military occupational specialties. Morrison studied the timeline. 30 days is aggressive given current operational tempo. It needs to be aggressive, Park countered. Every day we delay is another day we operate below our actual capability. The urgency matches the severity of the problem. The captain conceded her point and gestured for her to continue. Park advanced to the next phase, showing revised assignment protocols that required commanders to document how additional qualifications would be integrated into mission planning, or provide written justification for why integration was not feasible. This creates accountability, she said. Team leaders can no longer simply ignore capabilities because they're focused on primary rates. They must actively decide how to use the complete person. Morrison made notes on his tablet while she spoke. What resistance do you anticipate from team leaders? Park had prepared for this question. Some will argue this adds complexity to already demanding planning processes. Others may resist what they see as micromanagement of their personnel decisions. The key is framing this not as restriction, but as force multiplication. We are not telling them how to use their people. We are ensuring they know what their people can do. She advanced to Phase 3, covering team leader training updates. The proposal included a new module in the SEAL Team Leader course, specifically addressing cross-trained specialist integration. Case studies would feature both Reeves' incident and other examples for Park's research. We make this part of professional development rather than punitive correction, Park explained. Frame it as evolving best practices based on lessons learned. Morrison approved the approach and asked about the final phase. Park displayed the audit framework, showing quarterly reviews where commanders would brief their personnel utilization and demonstrate active integration of additional qualifications. This prevents regression, she said. Without sustained oversight, commands will drift back to old habits under operational pressure. Quarterly reviews keep the issue visible and maintain command emphasis. The captain spent several minutes reviewing the complete plan before speaking. This is solid work, Lieutenant Commander. I am approving immediate implementation for my group with a goal of expanding across all naval special warfare within 6 months. He turned his computer screen toward Park, showing an email composition. I am directing all subordinate commands to complete Phase 1 personnel reviews within 30 days and submit integration plans within 45 days. Your office will track compliance and provide support to commands that need assistance. Park acknowledged the tasking and began gathering her materials. Morrison stopped her before she reached the door with one additional direction. I want you to personally brief this at the next NSW Commanders Conference. The other group commanders need to understand both the scope and the solution. She confirmed she would prepare the briefing and departed to begin implementation. The walk back to her office took her past the Naval Special Warfare Center, where new candidates struggled through training that would determine if they earned the privilege of serving in special operations. Each one brought unique backgrounds and capabilities that would either be fully utilized or partially wasted, depending on the systems she was working to change. Back at Forward Operating Base Dwyer, Hendricks received the implementation order via secure message traffic. He read through the requirements and recognized this would demand significant time from his already strained leadership bandwidth. But he also understood the necessity after seeing what he had missed with Reeves. He called his team together for a brief and explained the new directive. Over the next week, we will review every person's complete service record and identify any additional qualifications or training we have not incorporated into our operations. Miller raised his hand and asked if this meant they would be pulling people from their primary duties. Hendricks shook his head. It means we stop thinking of people as having only primary duties. If someone has multiple capabilities, we plan for using them where appropriate. Webb spoke up next. Does this change how we integrate Doc Reeves going forward? Hendricks had expected the question. I spoke with Lieutenant Commander Park about exactly that. Reeves remains our primary corpsman, but she will also be designated as secondary sniper with proper equipment and mission planning that accounts for both roles. The team absorbed this information with mixed reactions. Some nodded approval, while others appeared uncertain about the implications. Hendricks understood their hesitation. Change always created discomfort, even when the logic was sound. Reeves entered the briefing area as the discussion concluded, returning from a medical supply run. She noticed the assembled team and asked if she had missed something important. Hendricks motioned her to join them and explained the new integration protocols. You will be receiving dedicated sniper equipment, and we will be adjusting mission planning to utilize you in both capacities, he said. I know that is not what you wanted when you chose the corpsman rate, but it reflects the reality of your capabilities. Reeves processed the information without immediate reaction. Her expression remained neutral, but Hendricks detected tension in her posture. She had deliberately stepped away from being a sniper, and now command was pulling her back into that role, whether she wanted it or not. I understand, she said finally. If that is what the mission requires, I will adapt. The response satisfied the formal requirement, but Hendricks recognized it lacked genuine acceptance. He made a mental note to have a private conversation with her later about navigating this transition. For now, the team had worked to complete reviewing personnel records and identifying capabilities they had overlooked. The rifle case arrived at Forward Operating Base Dwyer 3 days after Morrison approved the integration protocols. Reeves signed for the equipment from the supply sergeant and carried the hard case back to her quarters. The weight felt familiar in her hands, a reminder of who she used to be before she chose a different path. She opened the case on her cot and examined the contents. A dedicated Mk-11 sniper rifle lay secured in foam padding alongside advanced optics, bipod, cleaning kit, and 6 magazines. The weapon represented serious capability, far beyond the basic M4 she had used during the ambush. Someone in the supply chain had prioritized this requisition to get it delivered so quickly. Webb appeared in her doorway and knocked on the frame. Mind if I come in? He carried his own rifle case and a range bag filled with ammunition. Reeves gestured him inside, and he set his equipment beside hers. Figure we should zero your optic and run through some drills together. Get you reacquainted with proper gear. She appreciated the practical approach rather than making the situation more complicated than necessary. They gathered the equipment and walked to the small-range facility on the south side of the compound, where they could shoot out to 800 meters safely. The afternoon heat made the air shimmer above the sand berms as they set up on the firing line. Webb helped her mount the optic and adjust the bipod tension to her preference. The ritual of preparing the weapon brought back muscle memory she thought she had left behind at Quantico years ago. What was the last time you shot for qualification? Webb asked while loading magazines. For years ago, before I finished corpsman training. I have maintained basic rifle proficiency, but nothing at this level. Reeves chambered around and settled into position behind the scope. The first shot at 100 meters confirmed the rifle was roughly zeroed, but needed adjustment. She made corrections to the optic and fired 3 more rounds that grouped within 2 inches of each other. Webb observed her process and noted how efficiently she worked through the zero procedure. Your fundamentals are still solid, he said. Now let's see how you do at distance. They moved through progressive ranges starting at 300 meters and working outward. Reeves adjusted to the new rifle's characteristics and a superior optic that showed targets with crystal clarity compared to the damaged scope she had used during the ambush. Each group tightened as she relearned the weapon system. At 600 meters, Webb set up beside her, and they engaged the same targets simultaneously. His shots landed consistently in the center of the silhouettes, while hers scattered slightly wider. She adjusted her breathing pattern, and the next group tightened to match his precision. "You are compensating for equipment you don't have anymore," Webb observed. "That rifle shoots flatter than an M4. Trust the ballistics and your fundamentals." Reeves processed his coaching and made the mental adjustment. The next 5 shots at 700 meters grouped within 4 inches, performance that matched qualified sniper standards. Webb nodded approval and suggested they run a combat scenario drill. He set up multiple targets at varying ranges and explained the sequence. Engage them as if you were providing overwatch for a patrol in contact. Speed matters, but accuracy matters more. Reeves studied the targets and calculated engagement order based on threat priority. When Webb gave the signal, she began firing in smooth rhythm, working from closest to farthest threat. 8 rounds in 45 seconds, and every target showed center mass hits. Webb checked the targets through a spotting scope and let out a low whistle. That is better than most snipers shoot after months of refresher training. "You sure it has been 4 years? Muscle memory apparently lasts longer than I expected," Reeves said while clearing her rifle. The admission carried mixed feelings, satisfaction at competence alongside regret that this capability remained so accessible after she tried to leave it behind. They broke for water and sat in the small shelter beside the range. Webb drank from his bottle and studied her expression before speaking. "You don't want to be doing this again, do you?" Reeves considered how to answer honestly. "I chose Marksman because I wanted to define myself by what I saved rather than what I destroyed. Every time I use these skills, I feel like I'm stepping backward from that choice." Webb understood the conflict but offered a different perspective. "You saved the entire patrol when you shot from that rooftop. 5 Taliban fighters who would have killed Americans went down instead. That is not separate from your medical mission. It is just another way of protecting your team." The logic made sense, but did not resolve the internal tension Reeves felt. She finished her water and stood to continue training. Webb recognized she needed time to process rather than more discussion, so they returned to shooting drills without further conversation about her conflicted feelings. Miller arrived at the range an hour later, carrying medical equipment and looking uncertain. Reeves noticed him standing near the entrance and called him over. Miller explained that Hendricks had asked him to receive combat medic training from her, part of the new approach to utilizing everyone's capabilities more effectively. Reeves welcomed the opportunity to focus on her chosen specialty. She cleared her rifle and secured it, then had Miller lay out the medical equipment on a table. For the next 2 hours, she walked him through advanced trauma care procedures, while Webb continued practicing on his own. The teaching came naturally to her. Each step explained with clear rationale and demonstrated with practiced hands. Miller absorbed the information quickly and asked intelligent questions about treating gunshot wounds in field conditions. By the end of the session, he could properly pack a wound cavity and establish an emergency airway. Webb finished his shooting and joined them as Reeves concluded the medical training. He observed how her demeanor changed when she worked in her corpsman role, the tension leaving her shoulders and her voice taking on the patient confidence of an experienced instructor. "You're good at this," Webb said after Miller departed. "Teaching, I mean. You have the gift for breaking down complex procedures so they make sense." Reeves packed the medical equipment carefully. "This is what I'm supposed to be doing. The shooting is necessary sometimes, but this is my purpose." Webb helped her carry the equipment back toward the main compound as evening settled across the desert. The temperature dropped from brutal to merely uncomfortable, and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. They walked in comfortable silence until Webb spoke again. "You know, you could be both things without losing yourself. Medic and marksman are not contradictory. They're both about protecting people you care about." Reeves wanted to believe him, but the internal conflict remained. She had constructed her identity around moving away from violence toward healing, and now circumstances demanded she inhabit both roles simultaneously. The person she wanted to be and the person she proved capable of being existed in uncomfortable tension. They reached the medical station, and she stored the equipment in its designated locations. Webb lingered in the doorway, watching her work through the familiar organizational routine. She noticed his presence and turned to face him. "Thank you for the training today." The honesty in her statement included appreciation for both the practical instruction and the attempted reassurance about her dual role. Webb acknowledged her thanks and departed to his own duties. Reeves remained in the medical station and conducted inventory of supplies, the concrete task providing comfort through its structure and purpose. Outside the small building, the compound continued its nightly routines of security checks and shift changes. Hendricks appeared an hour later to check on her progress with the new equipment. He found her organizing trauma supplies with a newly zeroed rifle propped in the corner. The juxtaposition captured the challenge they faced in integrating her complete capabilities without losing what made her effective in her primary role. "How did the range time go?" he asked. Reeves provided a brief summary of the training and her performance metrics. Hendricks listened and recognized she was giving him facts while avoiding discussion of how she felt about the situation. He decided not to push the issue tonight, accepting that some transitions required time rather than conversation. "We have a mission brief tomorrow morning for a village clearance operation," Hendricks said. "I will be planning with your dual capabilities in mind, both medical and Overwatch." Reeves acknowledged the information and Hendricks departed, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the equipment that represented her past and present merged into an uncertain future. She secured the medical station and walked to her quarters carrying the rifle that now belonged to her officially rather than just circumstantially. The weapon case fit under her cot beside her medical pack, both pieces of equipment coexisting in the small space just as they would need to coexist in her professional identity going forward. The morning briefing convened at 05:30 with the entire team assembled around the map table. Hendricks had spent the previous evening redesigning the mission plan to incorporate Reeves in both her medical and sniper capacities. The village clearance operation required coordination he had never attempted before with his corpsmen. The target village sat 8 kilometers northwest of the compound in terrain that offered limited cover for approach. Intelligence indicated a Taliban weapons cache hidden among the civilian structures, with approximately 6 to 8 fighters providing security. Standard procedure would put the corpsman back with headquarters element while the assault teams cleared buildings systematically. Hendricks pointed to an elevated position 500 meters east of the village. "Reeves, you will establish Overwatch here with clear sight lines to the northern and eastern approaches. Webb will embed with the assault element and provide immediate medical coverage if needed." The team absorbed this role reversal with visible surprise. Webb studied the map and recognized the logic. The Overwatch position provided better coverage than his usual location, while keeping a trained medic closer to where contact was most likely. But it violated the standard doctrine of protecting the corpsman from direct combat. Miller raised the obvious question. If Reeves is on Overwatch, who provides medical support if she goes down? Hendricks had anticipated the concern. Webb has received advanced combat medic training from Reeves over the past 3 days. He can handle trauma care until we extract casualties to the compound. Reeves remains our most qualified medical asset, but she is no longer our only option for emergency treatment. The explanation satisfied the immediate concern, but several team members exchanged glances that communicated their uncertainty about this approach. They had operated for months with established patterns, and now their leader was restructuring based on capabilities they had only recently discovered. Reeves examined the Overwatch position on the map and calculated sight lines to probable fighting positions within the village. The elevation gave her advantage for precision fire, while the distance kept her out of immediate danger from small arms. The plan made tactical sense, even as it pushed her further into the marksman role she wanted to avoid. Webb moved beside her and pointed to a cluster of buildings on the village's northern edge. If we make contact here, I will need you to cover our withdrawal route. These alleyways create natural choke points where they could pin us down. She acknowledged his concern and mentally cataloged the angles she would need to cover. The professional assessment came automatically despite her reluctance to be in this position. Her training overrode her preferences when mission requirements demanded it. Hendricks continued the briefing with timing, communications protocols, and contingency plans. The insertion would occur at dawn, using the low light to mask their approach. Reeves would move to overwatch position first and establish security before the assault element advanced toward the village. The team dispersed to prepare equipment and conduct final checks. Reeves gathered both her sniper rifle and medical pack, the weight of dual responsibilities literal as well as figurative. She verified ammunition loads, optic functionality, and medical supplies with equal attention to each system. Miller approached her while she worked and cleared his throat nervously. I wanted to apologize for the comments I made before the last mission. The babysitting joke and questioning why we had a female corpsman. That was disrespectful, and I am sorry. Reeves looked up from her equipment and studied his expression. The apology appeared genuine, motivated by recognition of his error rather than fear of consequences. She appreciated the direct approach rather than awkward avoidance. I accept your apology. The honesty in her response included no lingering resentment. People see what they expect to see until something forces them to look closer. You are not the first to make that mistake, and you will not be the last. Miller nodded and asked if he could help carry equipment to the vehicles. They worked together loading gear while the compound prepared for the mission. The cooperation between them reflected the team's gradual adaptation to understanding who Reeves actually was beyond her rate designation. The convoy departed the compound at 0600 as dawn light began spreading across the desert landscape. Reeves rode in the lead vehicle with Hendricks and two other team members, her sniper rifle secured beside her. The drive to the insertion point took 20 minutes over rough terrain that tested the MRAP's suspension. They stopped 2 kilometers from the target village, and Reeves dismounted with her equipment. Hendricks reviewed the route to her overwatch position one final time before she moved out alone. The solo movement to position felt familiar from her sniper training, the solitude and self-reliance that defined long-range reconnaissance work. She covered the distance in 30 minutes, moving carefully through rocky terrain that provided concealment but made quiet movement difficult. The overwatch position offered exactly the advantages Hendricks had identified on the map: clear sight lines across multiple approach routes and elevation that extended her effective range. Reeves established her firing position and ranged key points throughout the village using her laser rangefinder. The main intersection sat at 480 meters, the northern buildings at 520 meters, and the eastern edge at 600 meters. All well within her capability with the Mk-11 and quality optics. She keyed her radio and reported position established with clear fields of fire. Hendricks acknowledged and began moving the assault element toward the village perimeter. Through her scope, Reeves tracked their progress, 6 operators moving in coordinated bounds using available cover effectively. The village appeared quiet in the early morning with only a few civilians visible near the southern buildings. The assault element reached their breach point on the northern edge without making contact. Hendricks signaled to begin clearance, and the team split into 2 pairs entering adjacent structures. Reeves maintained her scan across the likely danger areas while listening to radio traffic from the clearance operations. Each building was searched methodically, with no weapons cache discovered in the first 3 structures. The 4th building produced results when Webb reported finding ammunition crates hidden beneath floorboards. The discovery triggered immediate response from Taliban fighters who had been observing from concealed positions. Automatic weapons fire erupted from 2 buildings on the eastern edge, rounds impacting near where the assault element worked. Hendricks called contact and ordered his team to establish defensive positions while identifying the threat locations. Through her scope, Reeves located the first shooter in a second-story window, 540 meters distant. She settled into her firing position and controlled her breathing while placing the reticle on center mass. The The shot broke clean, and the fighter dropped from view. She cycled the bolt and found the second shooter emerging from a doorway to reposition. The second shot caught him mid-stride, and he collapsed in the alley. Hendricks called over the radio, asking for confirmation on friendly sniper fire. Reeves acknowledged both shots and reported 2 threats eliminated on the eastern edge. Webb's voice came through with urgency. He had a casualty with gunshot wound to the leg and needed time to treat. Reeves scanned for additional threats and identified movement in a building the assault element had already cleared. A fighter had remained hidden and now attempted to flank the team from behind. She engaged at 490 meters and watched the round impact through a window where the fighter had positioned himself. His weapon clattered to the ground as he fell, and no further movement came from that position. The precision fire from an unexpected direction had broken the Taliban response before it could develop into a sustained firefight. Hendricks used the suppression to organize withdrawal with the captured weapons cache and the wounded team member. Webb provided emergency treatment, while the others established security for movement back to the extraction point. Reeves covered their entire withdrawal with continuous overwatch, scanning for threats that never materialized. The mission concluded successfully with 1 minor casualty, a significant weapons cache seized, and no civilian harm. The team loaded into vehicles at the extraction point and began movement back to the compound. Reeves rode in the medical vehicle beside Webb, who continued treating the leg wound during transit. Back at base, Hendricks assembled the team for a quick debrief while the immediate details remained fresh. He acknowledged Reeves' Overwatch performance as essential to mission success and noted that having Webb available for immediate medical treatment had likely prevented a more serious outcome for the wounded operator. Miller spoke up during the debrief to share his perspective as someone who had been near the casualty when the shooting started. Having Doc on Overwatch gave us more confidence to press the clearance because we knew she had our backs. And having Webb right there with medical gear probably saved Johnson's leg. Other team members added their observations about how the revised approach had worked better than expected. The dual capability integration had proven itself under actual combat conditions rather than just theoretical planning. Reeves listened to the discussion and recognized she could no longer argue against being utilized in both roles when the evidence showed clear mission benefit. Webb caught her eye during the debrief and nodded slightly, a gesture acknowledging what they both understood. She had saved lives today through both marksmanship and medical preparation, 2 aspects of the same protective purpose, even if she struggled to reconcile them internally. Lieutenant Commander Park stood before 15 SEAL Team commanders in the conference room at Naval Special Warfare Group headquarters. The presentation on the screen behind her showed personnel utilization statistics that painted an uncomfortable picture of systematic capability waste. Captain Morrison sat at the head of the table and watched his subordinate leaders absorb the data. The comprehensive review she had ordered across Morrison's group revealed 47 specialists with significant additional qualifications that had never been incorporated into mission planning. The number exceeded her initial estimate, and the pattern repeated consistently across every team regardless of leadership style or deployment history. Park advanced to the next slide, showing specific examples with identifying information redacted. A hospital corpsman with Scout Sniper School graduation who had been utilized purely for medical support until a combat incident revealed her marksmanship capability. A logistics specialist with a master's degree in cybersecurity processing supply requisitions, while teams struggled with communication security issues. A cultural advisor with fluency in 3 Afghan dialects relegated to administrative duties instead of intelligence support. Each case represents training we funded and capability we ignored, Park stated while moving to the next slide. The estimated cost for developing these in-use qualifications exceeds $12 million for this group alone. But the operational cost cannot be measured in dollars. How many missions were less effective? How many risks were unnecessarily accepted? How many problems went unsolved because we never asked what our people could actually do? Commander Blake, leader of SEAL Team 7, raised his hand and spoke without waiting for acknowledgement. You're suggesting we overhaul personnel management practices that have worked for decades based on a handful of outlier cases. His tone carried skepticism rather than hostility, but the resistance was evident. Park had anticipated pushback and prepared a response carefully. I am suggesting we adapt our practices to match the reality that modern special operations personnel bring increasingly diverse backgrounds and cross-training. The corpsman who saved her SEAL team was not an outlier. She was an overlooked asset who existed in plain sight for 8 months while her team leader never read past her rate designation. She clicked to a new slide showing the integration protocols Morrison had approved. The 4-phase implementation plan appeared with timelines and accountability measures clearly defined. Blake studied the requirements, and his expression shifted from skeptical to concerned. You want every team leader to review complete service records for all assigned personnel within 30 days while we maintain current operational tempo, Blake said. That is a significant administrative burden. Morrison leaned forward and spoke before Park could respond. The burden of not knowing our own capabilities is higher. One of my teams nearly lost a patrol because their most qualified sniper was sitting back at base organizing bandages. That failure sits with me as much as it sits with the team leader who never bothered to read her file. The room absorbed the group commander's direct statement. Morrison rarely inserted himself into tactical discussions, but when he did, his words carried weight that ended debate. Park used the momentum to advance through the remaining slides, covering implementation specifics and support resources available to team leaders. The training command has developed a 2-hour module on specialist integration that all team leaders will complete within 60 days, Park explained. The module includes case studies, best practices for capability assessment, and planning frameworks for dual-role personnel. Additionally, my office will provide consultative support to any team struggling with integration challenges. Commander Harris from SEAL Team 3 asked about the quarterly audit process and how it would be conducted without creating additional bureaucracy. Park addressed his concern by explaining that audits would occur during existing operational readiness reviews rather than as separate events. You already brief your personnel status quarterly, Park said. We are simply adding a requirement to address how additional qualifications are being utilized or why they are not suitable for integration. 10 minutes added to your existing brief. The pragmatic approach satisfied Harris, and several other commanders nodded approval. Park sensed the resistance shifting toward cautious acceptance as the leaders recognized the plan had been designed with operational realities in mind rather than administrative convenience. She concluded the presentation with results from Hendrick's team where the integration had already occurred. Mission effectiveness increased based on more flexible employment options. Team confidence improved from understanding complete capabilities of all members. And most significantly, the team had begun identifying additional training opportunities to create more cross-functional capability throughout the unit. This is not about adding requirements for the sake of bureaucracy, Park stated in her closing remarks. This is about fighting smarter by using everything we already have. The enemy does not care about our organizational charts or rate designations. They care about our effectiveness. We owe it to our people and our mission to maximize both. Morrison thanked Park and dismissed her so he could continue the discussion with his team leaders privately. She gathered her materials and departed while the commanders began debating implementation details. The conversation behind her mixed practical concerns about workload with growing recognition that the current approach had indeed missed critical capabilities. Park walked to her office and found 3 messages waiting from other NSW groups requesting information about the integration protocols. Word had spread quickly through the special operations community, and other commanders wanted to understand both the problem and the solution before it became a fleet-wide mandate. She spent the next 2 hours on phone calls with group commanders from both coasts explaining the methodology and sharing the data her review had uncovered. Each conversation revealed similar patterns of underutilized specialists, and each commander expressed varying degrees of concern about how they had missed these capabilities. The call with Captain Stevens from Group 2 on the East Coast proved most productive. Stevens had already begun his own preliminary review after hearing about Reeves' case and identified 32 similar situations across his command. He asked Park to present at his headquarters the following month to brief his team leaders using her proven approach. By late afternoon, Park had commitments to present the integration protocols at 4 different commands and requests for her review methodology from 6 others. What had begun as an investigation into a single incident at a forward operating base had evolved into a command-wide examination of personnel management practices. She compiled her notes from the day's discussions and began drafting an implementation guide that other commands could adapt to their specific situations. The document needed to balance comprehensive guidance with flexibility for different operational contexts. She worked late into the evening refining the framework while the headquarters building emptied of personnel heading home to families. At Forward Operating Base Dwyer, Hendricks reviewed the message traffic from Park's presentation and felt simultaneous pride and discomfort. Pride that his team had become the model for positive change. Discomfort that the change only occurred because of his initial failure to properly assess his personnel. Reeves found him in the operations center reviewing reports and asked if he had time to discuss her role going forward. Hendricks set aside the paperwork and gestured for her to sit. She had clearly been thinking about something specific, and he suspected it involved the tension between her medical focus and the marksmanship duties she now performed regularly. "I have been struggling with being both medic and sniper," Reeves began without preamble. "I chose corpsman because I wanted to save lives rather than take them. Having to return to marksmanship feels like abandoning that choice." Hendricks listened without interrupting while she expressed the conflict she had been carrying since the initial ambush. When she finished, he took time to organize his response carefully, recognizing this conversation mattered more than most leadership discussions he conducted. "You did not abandon your choice," he said finally. "You expanded it. Every shot you take from Overwatch protects team members who would otherwise be at greater risk. That is still saving lives, just through a different mechanism." Reeves considered his perspective, but the internal tension remained visible in her expression. Hendricks continued before she could voice continued objection. "I read your complete file after Park's visit. Do you know what your scout sniper instructors wrote in their final evaluation? They said you had the best fundamentals they had seen in years, but you were more interested in understanding how to save the people you shot than perfecting the craft of shooting them. Even then, you were focused on medicine." The statement surprised Reeves. She had never seen those instructor comments and did not realize they had perceived her divided focus even during sniper training. "You are not 2 different people," Hendricks continued. "You are one person with multiple ways of protecting your team. Sometimes that means trauma care, and sometimes it means precision fire. Both come from the same purpose. Maybe it is time to stop seeing them as contradictory and start seeing them as complementary." Reeves absorbed his words and felt some of the internal conflict ease. The reframing did not completely resolve her struggle, but it offered a perspective she had not considered. Perhaps she could integrate these aspects of herself rather than forcing them into opposition. "Thank you, Chief," she said while standing to leave. "That helps more than you know." After she departed, Hendricks returned to his reports, but found his mind wandering to broader questions about how many other people in the military struggled with similar identity conflicts because they possessed capabilities that did not fit neatly into single categories. The integration protocols addressed administrative and operational concerns, but the personal dimension required different support that leaders rarely provided. The implementation of integration protocols across naval special warfare progressed through its second month with results that exceeded Park's projections. Her office tracked compliance data from 8 groups showing 92% completion of Phase 1 personnel reviews. The remaining 8% consisted of teams deployed to locations where administrative tasks took lower priority than immediate operational demands. Park compiled the aggregate data into a comprehensive report for the NSW commander showing patterns that emerged across the entire community. The review had identified 217 specialists with significant underutilized qualifications ranging from advanced technical degrees to combat skills developed in previous military occupational specialties. She sat in her office reviewing individual case files when her phone rang with a call from Quantico. Gunnery Sergeant Collins from Scout Sniper School had seen the service-wide message traffic about specialist integration and wanted to discuss implications for how the Marine Corps trained cross-functional personnel. Collins explained that he had been tracking graduates who cross-trained to other specialties and noticed a pattern of their sniper qualifications being ignored in subsequent assignments. He had 16 former students currently serving in non-sniper roles across the Marine Corps and Special Operations community, several of whom possessed elite-level marksmanship capability that their commands never utilized. "Your hospital corpsman was one of mine," Collins said. Maya Reeves graduated third in her class and showed some of the best natural instincts I have seen. When she told me she wanted to cross-train a corpsman, I tried to talk her out of it. Thought it was a waste of her talent. Now, I'm wondering if the waste was not her choice, but how the system treated her after she made it. Park recognized the insight and asked Collins if he would be willing to participate in updating training protocols to better prepare both specialists and their future commanders for integration challenges. Collins agreed immediately and suggested involving instructors from other specialty schools who likely face similar issues. The conversation sparked an idea that Park developed over the following week. She drafted a proposal for a cross-functional specialist symposium bringing together instructors from sniper schools, medical training commands, technical schools, and language programs. The goal would be creating a framework for how specialists could maintain multiple qualifications without being forced into single-role assignments. Captain Morrison approved the symposium concept and provided funding for a 3-day event at Coronado in 2 months. Park began coordinating with training commands across the military while continuing to track integration progress in operational units. At Forward Operating Base Dwyer, the integration approach had become standard practice for Hendricks' team. Reeves operated in dual roles on every mission with planning that accounted for both her medical and marksmanship capabilities. The flexibility created tactical advantages that became increasingly apparent as the team adapted their procedures. During a high-value target raid on a compound 15 kilometers north of the base, Reeves provided overwatch while Webb embedded with the assault element carrying medical gear. The operation proceeded smoothly until Webb took shrapnel from a grenade that wounded him and 2 other team members simultaneously. Reeves made the decision in seconds, abandoning her overwatch position to sprint 400 meters to the casualty collection point. She arrived as Miller struggled to treat 3 wounded operators with supplies meant for 1. Her medical expertise and additional equipment turned chaos into controlled trauma management that saved all 3 patients. Hendricks filed an incident report noting that having a corpsman with tactical movement skills and weapons proficiency enabled her to rapidly reposition when the situation changed. A traditional medical-only corpsman would have required security escort and move slower under fire. Reeves' Scout sniper training made her self-sufficient during the emergency displacement. The report reached Park's desk as part of routine reviews, and she recognized it as perfect case study material for the upcoming symposium. She contacted Hendricks and requested permission to interview both him and Reeves about how the dual-role approach had evolved through multiple combat operations. The interview occurred via secure video conference with Park in Coronado and the team in Afghanistan. Hendricks described the planning considerations for missions with dual-role personnel, while Reeves explained how she mentally prepared for switching between medical and marksmanship focus, depending on mission requirements. Park asked Reeves directly how she had resolved the internal conflict between her 2 roles. Reeves paused before answering, choosing her words carefully. "I stopped seeing them as different roles and started seeing them as different tools for the same mission," Reeves said. "When I am on overwatch with my rifle, I am protecting my team from threats they cannot address themselves. When I am providing trauma care, I am protecting them from injuries they cannot treat themselves. The purpose is identical even if the methods differ." The clarity in her statement reflected growth from the conflicted corpsman who had struggled to accept her dual identity. Park recognized that personal resolution as significant as any tactical success, perhaps more so because it demonstrated sustainable integration rather than grudging compliance. Park used clips from an interview in her presentation to the NSW commander the following week. The briefing covered implementation progress, success metrics, and recommendations for expanding the protocols beyond naval special warfare to other special operations components. The commander approved all recommendations and directed Park to coordinate with Army Special Operations Command and Air Force Special Operations Command to share the integration framework. What had begun as a Navy-specific initiative was evolving into joint special operations doctrine affecting thousands of personnel across multiple services. 2 weeks before the symposium, Park received notification that Reeves had been selected for advancement to Hospital Corpsman First Class and recommended for a Navy Commendation Medal recognizing her actions during both the initial ambush and subsequent operations. The awards package included detailed documentation of how her dual capabilities had directly contributed to mission success and casualty prevention. Park called Reeves personally to inform her of the recognition before official notification arrived. Reeves accepted the news with characteristic understatement, thanking Park but noting that she had simply done what the situation required. "You did more than that," Park said. "You proved that specialists with multiple qualifications can be fully integrated without losing effectiveness in their primary roles. Every corpsman who faces similar challenges now has a model for how to navigate that complexity." After the call ended, Reeves sat in the medical station, considering how dramatically her situation had changed in 3 months. She had arrived at this forward base wanting only to practice medicine and remain invisible as anything else. Circumstances had forced her visibility and institutional recognition followed. The attention still made her uncomfortable, but she understood its purpose extended beyond her individual story. Miller entered the medical station and asked if she had time to review some advanced trauma procedures he wanted to practice. Reeves welcomed the focus on teaching, and they spent the next hour working through casualty scenarios while she provided feedback on his technique. The teaching reminded her why she had chosen the corpsman path originally. The satisfaction of developing capability in others felt more meaningful than demonstrating her own capabilities. Miller's progress from basic first aid to competent trauma care represented the kind of impact she valued most. Webb appeared as the training session concluded and asked Reeves if she wanted to run shooting drills before evening formation. She agreed, and they walked to the range together, carrying their rifles in comfortable silence. Their professional relationship had evolved into genuine mutual respect built on shared expertise rather than rank or role. At the range, they practiced rapid target engagement scenarios with increasing complexity. Webb set up targets at varying distances and called out engagement sequences while Reeves worked through them with smooth efficiency. Her performance had improved measurably since receiving the dedicated rifle and regular practice time. "You are shooting better than I am now," Webb said while examining the target patterns. Reeves dismissed the compliment, but Webb insisted on the accuracy of his assessment. "I'm serious. Your fundamentals are cleaner and your target transitions are faster. You have natural ability I can practice toward, but never fully match." Reeves appreciated his honesty while understanding that ability without purpose remained insufficient. She had the skill, but she also had the philosophical framework for when and why to employ it. The combination made her effective while keeping her grounded in values that prevented the work from consuming her identity. They concluded the range session and secured their weapons before walking back toward the compound. The sun set behind distant mountains, casting long shadows across the desert landscape. Webb asked what Reeves planned to do after her current deployment ended in 3 months. "I have been considering instructor duty at the Combat Medic Schoolhouse," Reeves said, "teaching corpsmen how to operate in special operations environments. The work would let her share the integration lessons while remaining focused on her medical specialty." Webb suggested she also consider teaching at Scout Sniper School, bringing the medical perspective to students who traditionally received no instruction in combat medicine beyond basic first aid. The cross-functional approach could improve sniper operations by creating operators who better understood casualty care. Reeves found the idea intriguing and made a mental note to discuss it with Park during the upcoming symposium. The concept of training snipers in advanced medicine represented exactly the kind of capability integration the new protocols encouraged. Perhaps her unique background positioned her to bridge gaps that had existed simply because no one thought to connect those particular dots. The Cross-Functional Specialists Symposium convened at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado on a Monday morning with representatives from 15 different training commands. Park stood at the podium watching instructors from sniper schools, medical programs, technical academies, and language institutes take their seats in the auditorium. Captain Morrison provided opening remarks emphasizing the strategic importance of maximizing personnel capabilities in an era of constrained resources and expanding mission requirements. Park began her presentation with a case that had triggered the entire initiative. She showed photographs of the forward operating base where Reeves had operated and described the circumstances that revealed her overlooked qualifications. The audience listened with growing attention as she detailed how 8 months passed with a Scout sniper graduate serving purely in medical capacity while her team never knew they had elite marksmanship capability immediately available. Gunnery Sergeant Collins sat in the third row and nodded recognition when Park mentioned Reeves by name. Several other instructors made notes, and Park suspected they were mentally reviewing their own graduates who might face similar situations. She advanced through slides showing the full scope of underutilized specialists identified across naval special warfare and the operational costs of that oversight. The data visualization made the pattern undeniable, and several attendees shifted uncomfortably recognizing they had contributed to the problem through standard training practices that encourage specialization without consideration for integration. The second day focused on developing frameworks for preparing specialists to maintain multiple qualifications and educating commanders to recognize and utilize complete capabilities. Working groups formed around specific combinations of skills that appeared most frequently in the data: combat specialists with technical degrees, medical personnel with tactical qualifications, linguists with operational backgrounds. Collins led the discussion for combat skills combined with other specialties. He proposed modifications to Scout Sniper School curriculum that would include modules on how graduates could maintain marksmanship proficiency while serving in other roles. The concept addressed a challenge he had observed for years: students who excelled at sniper training but then allowed those skills to atrophy when assigned to different duties. A Navy medical instructor raised concerns about corpsmen maintaining weapons qualifications while meeting the demanding continuing education requirements for medical certifications. The concern was valid, and Park acknowledged that integration required careful planning rather than simply adding requirements to already full schedules. Reeves attended the symposium as subject matter expert, representing operators who had successfully navigated dual-role integration. She sat on a panel this second afternoon alongside 3 other specialists with diverse backgrounds: an Air Force combat controller who was also a licensed paramedic, an Army Special Forces engineer with a doctorate in structural engineering, and a Navy SEAL with fluency in 4 Middle Eastern languages. The moderator asked each panel member how they maintained proficiency in multiple specialties simultaneously. Reeves described her approach of structured practice schedules that allocated time for both medical continuing education and marksmanship drills, treating both as essential rather than prioritizing one over the other. The key is recognizing that both capabilities serve the same mission, Reeves explained. I do not maintain my shooting skills because I want to be a sniper. I maintain them because my team needs me to provide that capability when circumstances require it. That purpose keeps the training from feeling like burden. Questions from the audience revealed widespread interest in practical implementation details. Instructors wanted to know how much time operators needed to maintain secondary qualifications at acceptable levels. Commanders wanted frameworks for determining when integration made sense versus when it created unsustainable workload. Park had anticipated these questions, and her team had developed preliminary guidelines based on data from the first 3 months of integration implementation. The guidelines suggested minimum proficiency standards for secondary qualifications, recommended training frequencies, and decision matrices for commanders assessing whether integration served operational needs. On the final day of the symposium, attendees drafted recommendations for service-wide implementation across all military branches. The document proposed changes to training curricula, personnel assignment processes, evaluation systems, and leadership education. Park recognized that comprehensive adoption would require years and bureaucratic persistence, but the symposium had created momentum that would be difficult to reverse. Captain Morrison closed the symposium by announcing that Naval Special Warfare would establish a permanent office focused on specialist integration with Lieutenant Commander Park as the founding director. The assignment represented significant career progression for Park and institutional commitment to sustaining the initiative beyond its initial implementation phase. After the symposium concluded, Park invited Reeves to her office to discuss future plans. They sat in comfortable chairs by the window overlooking the Pacific while Park explained the new directorate's mission and proposed that Reeves join her staff after completing her current deployment. Your experience provides exactly the perspective we need for developing training programs and advising commands on integration challenges, Park said. You have lived both sides of this issue, and you communicate the lessons clearly. Reeve considered the offer carefully. The position would advance her career and allow her to influence how the military approached specialist integration broadly. But it would also pull her away from operational medicine, which remained her primary passion. Can I maintain clinical proficiency while working in your directorate? Reeves asked. I did not want to become someone who used to practice medicine and now just talks about it. Park assured her that the position included time allocated for clinical duty at Naval Medical Center, San Diego, maintaining her corpsman skills. The arrangement would let her continue practical medicine while contributing to policy development. Reeves agreed to consider the offer seriously and provide her decision within 2 weeks. Webb found Reeves after the symposium ended, having attended the final day as observer. They walked along the beach near the base while discussing what the next year might hold for each of them. Webb faced his own career decision about whether to accept assignment as an instructor at Scout Sniper School or remain with SEAL teams in operational roles. I keep thinking about what you said during the panel, Webb mentioned, about both capabilities serving the same mission. That perspective applies to teaching versus operating too. Both serve the mission, just at different scales and time frames. Reeves agreed and suggested that perhaps the best operators eventually became teachers because they understood how to transfer capability to others rather than just demonstrate it themselves. The conversation meandered through career philosophy and personal values while waves crashed steadily against the shore. They returned to base as evening settled and went their separate directions with mutual respect that had grown from initial skepticism to genuine professional friendship. The symposium had brought together dozens of specialists facing similar integration challenges and created a community that would support each other through the inevitable difficulties ahead. Park spent the evening after the symposium writing her acceptance memo for the directorate position and outlining her initial priorities for the new office. The work would demand significant effort, but she felt energized by the scope of impact possible through systematic institutional change. One case study of an overlooked corpsman had revealed patterns affecting thousands of military personnel across all services. At Forward Operating Base Dwyer, Hendricks received notification that his team would redeploy to the United States in 6 weeks to begin reconstitution and training cycle. The timing meant Reeves would complete her deployment, having fully demonstrated the value of dual-role integration through 9 months of consistent performance in combat operations. Miller approached Hendricks to discuss his own career plans. The integration initiative had inspired him to pursue formal combat medic training to complement his SEAL qualifications. He wanted to become the kind of cross-functional operator that teams increasingly needed. Hendricks encouraged the goal and offered to support his application to the appropriate schools. The conversation reminded Hendricks that institutional change ultimately succeeded or failed based on individual decisions by operators who chose to develop additional capabilities and leaders who chose to utilize them fully. The protocols and policies created structure, but people made the system work through daily choices about how they invested their time and energy. He walked to the medical station and found Reeves conducting inventory of supplies before the upcoming redeployment. They discussed the transition plan for her replacement and ensured all medical documentation would transfer properly. The routine administrative work provided comfort through its familiarity even as larger changes loomed. Hendricks thanked Reeve for her service with the team and acknowledged that her presence had taught him lessons about leadership he should have learned earlier in his career. She accepted the recognition gracefully and noted that sometimes the most important lessons came from mistakes that forced growth rather than successes that confirmed existing approaches. The compound continued its evening routines around them while they finished the inventory work together. The deployment that had begun with assumptions and oversight would end with recognition and integration, a trajectory that reflected both individual and institutional evolution toward more effective employment of available capabilities. The ceremony took place at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado 3 months after Hendricks' team redeployed from Afghanistan. The amphitheater filled with naval special warfare personnel gathered to recognize achievements during the recent deployment cycle. Morning sunlight reflected off the Pacific Ocean visible beyond the seating area, while a light breeze carried salt air across the assembly. Reeves stood in formation with other award recipients wearing her dress blue uniform. The Navy Commendation Medal citation sat in a folder held by the awards officer who would read the official language describing her actions. She felt uncomfortable with the public recognition, but understood that ceremonies served purposes beyond individual acknowledgement. Captain Morrison called the formation to attention and began presenting awards with brief descriptions of each recipient's contributions. Several SEALs received medals for direct action missions. An intelligence officer was recognized for developing targeting packages that led to high-value captures, and a logistics specialist earned recognition for solving supply chain problems that kept operations running smoothly. When Morrison reached Reeves' name, he paused before reading the citation to provide context for those unfamiliar with her story. He described the ambush that had pinned her team and the decision she made to employ capabilities her team leader had not known she possessed. The 5 precision shots that broke the enemy's advantage and enabled the team's survival. The citation described her actions during multiple subsequent operations where she operated in dual roles as both corpsman and precision marksman. Morrison emphasized that her performance demonstrated how proper integration of cross-functional specialists multiplied combat effectiveness, while her medical expertise saved 4 lives during emergency trauma situations. Hospital Corpsman First Class Maya Reeves, Morrison called. She stepped forward and stood at attention while he pinned the medal to her uniform and shook her hand. The assembled personnel applauded, and she returned to formation, feeling the weight of expectations that came with such recognition. After the ceremony concluded, Reeves found herself surrounded by corpsmen and SEALs who wanted to discuss her experience with dual-role integration. Several young hospital corpsmen asked about maintaining both medical and tactical proficiencies. She answered their questions honestly, describing the time commitment and mental discipline required, but also the satisfaction of serving her team completely rather than partially. Webb approached after the crowd thinned and congratulated her on the recognition. He mentioned that he had accepted the instructor position at Scout Sniper School and would begin teaching in 2 months. His decision had been influenced partly by their conversations about how teaching multiplied impact across time by developing capability in others. I talked to the school commander about adding combat medicine modules to the curriculum, Webb said. He is interested if you would be willing to come teach when you get settled at Parks Directorate. Reeves agreed to discuss the possibility once she understood her new schedule and responsibilities. Hendricks found her as she prepared to leave the ceremony area. He had been promoted to senior chief and assigned as the enlisted leader for a SEAL team preparing for deployment to Africa. The position reflected both his experience and the leadership growth that had come from confronting his assumptions about specialist integration. "I wrote something for your service record that I wanted you to see first," Hendricks said while handing her a manila folder. Inside was his formal evaluation of her performance during the deployment. The narrative section went beyond routine praise to describe specifically how her dual capabilities had changed his approach to personnel management and mission planning. He had written that Reeves demonstrated what became possible when leaders looked past rate designations to understand complete capabilities. That her willingness to employ skills she had deliberately moved away from exemplified service before self. That her ability to transition between medical and marksmanship roles with equal proficiency set a standard other dual-role specialists could aspire to match. Reeves read the evaluation twice, recognizing that Hendricks had captured both her professional contributions and her personal struggle to reconcile competing aspects of her identity. She thanked him for the thoughtful assessment and told him it meant more than the medal, because it came from someone who had witnessed the full complexity of what integration required. The next week, Reeves reported to Park's newly established Specialist Integration Directorate in an office building adjacent to the Naval Special Warfare Headquarters. The directorate consisted of Park, 3 other officers with various specialty backgrounds, and 2 senior enlisted personnel, including Reeves, who served as subject matter experts on implementation challenges. Park had organized the office with clear focus areas: training curriculum development, command consultation services, metrics and analysis, and policy recommendations. Reeves joined the training curriculum team, working to create programs that would prepare specialists for dual-role operations and commanders for integrating cross-functional personnel. Her first major project involved developing a course for hospital corpsmen assigned to special operations units. The course would teach tactical movement, weapons proficiency, and operational planning in addition to advanced trauma care. The goal was creating corpsmen who could function independently in complex environments rather than requiring constant security and supervision. She worked with instructors from Scout Sniper School, SEAL Training Command, and the Naval Medical Corps to design a 6-week program that balanced medical and tactical instruction. The curriculum challenged traditional boundaries between medical and combat training, but reflected the reality that modern operations demanded corpsmen capable of both. During course development, Reeves maintained clinical proficiency through regular shifts at Naval Medical Center, San Diego Emergency Department. The work kept her medical skills sharp while exposing her to trauma cases that informed her teaching approach. She found satisfaction in treating civilian patients with the same intensity she had brought to combat medicine. Miller visited Coronado during his leave period before attending combat medic training. He wanted Reeves' advice on preparing for the course and integrating medical training with his SEAL qualifications. They spent an afternoon discussing study strategies and practice techniques while walking through the base where both had evolved into different versions of themselves. Miller mentioned that several other team members had pursued additional training inspired by watching Reeves operate in dual roles. The cultural shift within the team from single-role specialization toward multifunctional capability had occurred gradually but decisively. Hendricks actively encouraged cross-training and incorporated diverse skills into mission planning as standard practice rather than exception. 2 months into her director assignment, Reeves traveled to Quantico to teach the first iteration of the combat medicine module at Scout Sniper School. Webb had arranged for her to spend 2 days with students in their final training phase, teaching them advanced trauma care and casualty evacuation procedures. The sniper students approached the medical training with skepticism until Reeves demonstrated techniques for treating gunshot wounds under simulated combat conditions. Her credibility came from being one of them, a Scout Sniper graduate who understood their mindset and could communicate in their language. By the end of 2 days, every student had gained proficiency in trauma care that exceeded basic first aid. Gunnery Sergeant Collins observed the training and told Reeves afterward that she had accomplished in 2 days what he had failed to achieve in years of advocating for better medical training. The students respected her because she brought both medical expertise and sniper credentials rather than being an outsider trying to teach them skills they saw as secondary to their primary mission. Back at Coronado, Park briefed Captain Morrison on Directorate progress after 6 months of operation. The brief included data showing measurable improvements in mission effectiveness for units that had implemented integration protocols compared to control groups that maintained traditional specialist employment. The evidence supported expansion of integration requirements across all of naval special warfare, rather than treating it as voluntary best practice. Morrison approved making the protocols mandatory and directed Park to develop enforcement mechanisms that would ensure compliance without creating excessive administrative burden. The policy shift represented full institutional commitment to specialist integration as core doctrine rather than experimental program. Park shared the news with her team and acknowledged that mandatory implementation would increase their workload significantly as commands needed support navigating the transition. Reeves recognized that her role would expand from curriculum development to direct consultation with team leaders struggling to integrate dual-role personnel effectively. That evening, Reeves sat alone in her apartment reviewing the lesson plans she had developed for the Corpsman Tactical course. The work satisfied her in ways that pure clinical medicine or pure marksmanship never had. Teaching others to integrate multiple capabilities felt like her true purpose, the synthesis of everything she had learned through her own difficult journey toward accepting her complete identity. She thought about the young corpsman who had joined a SEAL team wanting only to practice medicine and remain invisible as anything else. That person seemed distant now, replaced by someone who understood that visibility came with responsibilities, but also opportunities to influence positive change. The recognition had been uncomfortable, but the platform it created let her help others avoid the struggle she had faced. 18 months after the ambush that changed everything, Senior Chief Hospital Corpsman Maya Reeves stood before a classroom of incoming SEAL Team corpsmen at the Naval Special Warfare Training Facility. The students represented the first cohort to complete the new Tactical Corpsman course she had designed, 6 weeks of intensive training that transformed traditional medical specialists into dual-capability operators. She began the final session by asking each student to describe their biggest challenge during the course. Answers varied from physical demands of tactical movement under load to mental strain of switching between medical and combat mindsets rapidly. Several mentioned struggling with accepting that they needed to be more than just medical providers, that their teams required complete operators rather than protected specialists. Reeves recognized their responses as echoes of her own journey. She shared her story without embellishment, describing how she had deliberately moved away from marksmanship toward medicine only to discover that circumstances demanded she embrace both identities simultaneously. The students listened with attention that came from understanding she had walked the path they now traveled. The military does not always let us be only one thing, she explained. We bring everything we are to the mission, whether we plan to use all those capabilities or not. The question is whether we resist that reality or accept it and prepare ourselves to serve completely. She walked them through case studies from her deployment, showing how dual-role integration created tactical advantages that single-role specialists could not provide. The students analyzed each scenario and discussed how they would apply the lessons in their future assignments. Their engagement demonstrated they understood the material not as abstract theory, but as practical framework for their operational careers. After the class concluded, Reeves met with Park to review expansion plans for the Directorate. The mandatory integration protocols have been adopted across all Naval Special Warfare Commands and were being evaluated by Army Special Operations Command and Air Force Special Operations Command for their own implementation. The initiative that began with one overlooked corpsman had evolved into joint doctrine affecting thousands of military personnel. Park showed Reeves preliminary data from a research team at the Naval Postgraduate School studying the operational impact of specialist integration. Mission success rates had improved by 12% in units with fully integrated dual-role personnel compared to control units. More significantly, casualty rates decreased by 18% when medical specialists possessed tactical proficiency that allowed rapid response without security escort delays. The numbers validated what Reeves knew from experience, but seeing the statistical evidence created different impact. Lives saved could be quantified and attributed directly to capability integration. The research would support expanding the protocols beyond special operations to conventional units where similar integration opportunities existed. Webb visited Coronado during his leave from Scout Sniper School and joined Reeves for lunch at a restaurant overlooking the bay. He shared that the combat medicine modules had become permanent curriculum with overwhelmingly positive feedback from students and graduates. Several snipers had credited the training with saving teammates during recent deployments when they provided emergency trauma care before corpsmen could reach casualties. Your influence extends to places you will never see, Webb said. Every sniper we graduate now carries medical capability that did not exist before you taught us its value. That multiplies across decades as they teach others what they learned from you. Reeves appreciated the perspective even as she remained uncomfortable with being positioned as the originator of something that seemed obvious in retrospect. Specialists should always have been integrated fully. She had simply been visible enough at the right moment to catalyze change that many others had advocated for quietly. They discussed their respective career paths and the choices each faced going forward. Webb considered moving to a SEAL team leadership position after completing his instructor tour. Reeves evaluated whether to pursue officer commissioning to expand her policy influence or remain enlisted, where she maintained closer connection to operational realities. Miller called that evening from his first deployment as a dual-qualified SEAL and combat medic. He described operating in both roles during a village clearance mission where his medical training saved a critically wounded teammate, while his tactical skills enabled him to continue fighting after providing treatment. The integration had become natural to him in ways that would have seemed impossible 18 months earlier. The conversation reminded Reeves that institutional change ultimately manifested through individual operators who internalized new approaches until they became standard practice. Miller represented the next generation of specialists who would never know the artificial boundaries between capabilities that had limited previous generations. Captain Morrison called a directorate review meeting the following week to assess progress and plan the next phase of expansion. Park briefed achievements, including curriculum development, training programs, consultation services, and research validating the approach. Morrison approved additional staff positions and increased budget allocation, reflecting the directorate's expanded mission. He also announced that the Chief of Naval Operations had requested Park present the integration model at a flag officer conference addressing force modernization. The invitation represented recognition at the highest levels of naval leadership that specialist integration addressed strategic challenges beyond tactical efficiency. Reeves attended the conference as subject matter expert and found herself answering questions from admirals and Marine Corps generals about implementation challenges and solutions. The surreal nature of the situation was not lost on her. 2 years earlier, she had been a junior corpsman trying to remain invisible. Now she briefed 3-star admirals on institutional transformation. The questions revealed that senior leaders understood integration as competitive advantage in an era when adversaries developed capabilities faster than traditional training pipelines could respond. Cross-functional specialists offered flexibility and adaptability that single-role personnel could not match. The military needed operators who could perform multiple missions rather than specialized technicians limited to narrow functions. After the conference, Reeves returned to teaching at the Corpsman course where she found the most satisfaction. The direct impact of developing capability in students provided tangible evidence that her work mattered in ways that policy development never could. She watched each cohort progress from uncertain specialists to confident dual-role operators and knew that some would save lives specifically because of skills she taught them. One evening, she stood on the beach near the training facility watching the sun set over the Pacific. The journey from that forward operating base in Afghanistan to this moment had changed her in ways she was still processing. She had resisted being pulled back into marksmanship only to discover that integration made her more effective at her core purpose of protecting her team. The internal conflict that had defined her early experience had resolved into acceptance that she was neither medic nor marksman, but both simultaneously. The synthesis created something more valuable than either capability alone. She had learned to stop seeing her identity as either or choice and embrace it as both in reality. Her phone buzzed with a message from Hendricks, who was deployed to Africa with his team. He sent a photo of his new corpsman, a young petty officer who had graduated from Reeves' tactical course the previous month. The message said the corpsman had performed exceptionally during a mission, providing both medical care and precision fire when the situation demanded both. Hendricks thanked Reeves for creating the training that prepared specialists to serve completely rather than partially. She smiled at the message and replied with encouragement, then looked back at the ocean stretching endlessly before her. Somewhere out there were hundreds of specialists navigating the same integration challenges she had faced. Some would struggle as she had struggled. Others would adapt more easily. All would benefit from protocols and training that acknowledged the complexity of being multiple things simultaneously. The story that began with assumptions and oversight had evolved into systematic change, affecting how the military developed and employed its people. One corpsman's journey from invisibility to recognition had revealed patterns that existed everywhere once people knew to look for them. The lesson was simple but profound. People were always more than their job title suggested, and effective organizations found ways to utilize everything their people could offer. Reeves turned from the ocean and walked back toward the training facility where tomorrow she would teach another group of corpsmen that being more than one thing was not a burden to resist, but a capability to embrace. The work continued because the need never ended, and the impact multiplied with each student who carried the lessons forward into their own careers. She thought about everyone watching this story unfold. People in communities across the country who might face their own moments of being underestimated or overlooked. Maybe you have been there too. That moment when you had to show people you were more than they assumed. When you proved your capabilities extended beyond the single role others assigned you. What was that moment for you? When did you have to step up and demonstrate the complete person you are rather than the limited version others expected? Those moments defined us and shaped how we moved through the world. Reeves had learned that lesson through fire and now taught others to embrace their complete capabilities before circumstances forced the revelation. The beach emptied as evening deepened, and she walked alone with her thoughts, content with the path that had brought her to this place where she could make a difference that mattered.